Welcome viewers. We bring to you complex subjects and explain simply. Our tagline almost now has been established as bringing the discussions of complex issues in simple language. Hybrid warfare and its ever-changing dimensions is the subject of discussion today. And this discussion will be with the two eminent speakers, Dr. John M. Nomikos and Col D K Salwan. They discuss the subject of hybrid warfare and its ever-changing dimensions. Hybrid warfare entails an interplay or fusion of conventional as well as unconventional instruments of power and tools of subversion. These instruments or tools are blended in a synchronized manner to exploit the vulnerabilities of an antagonist and achieve synergistic effects. D K Salwan actively follows the events involving the multilateral border disputes, past and future of conflicts, and future of warfare. He also studies and prolifically writes the regional and global geopolitics. Welcome to discussion, Col D K Salwan.
Thank you,
Professor John M. Nomikos is PhD and he is the founder and director of the Research Institute for European and American Studies. In short, it is called RIEAS. Since 2006, he is also the editor-in-chief of Journal of European and American Intelligence Studies. That the institute publishes twice a year. This journal is twice in a year published. Beside his work with the RIEAS, John is an assistant professor at the Webster University, Athens Campus, where he teaches international security, conducts professional seminars on national security and intelligence studies, terrorism in world politics, policies and practices. This discussion is organized by International Council for Industrial Security and Safety Management, which is in forefront in professionalizing the security professionals. Welcome viewers, and let's start the discussion with the opening comments from Col D K Salwan. Let's hear from you, Col Salwan. What is hybrid warfare? How it can be explained in very simple ways? Over to you.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, viewers. It's a great pleasure and matter of honor and privilege to be in conversation with Dr. John Nomikos on a very important issue which is concerning all of us today. I would make an endeavor to put across the evolution of the hybrid warfare in as simple terms as feasible. As we understand, the Clausewitz defined the warfare as nothing but a duel of extreme scale. War is therefore an act of violence intended to compel our opponents to fulfill our will. Thus, war is a mere continuation of policy by the other means. On the other hand, Sun Tzu maxim is subdue enemy without battle, that is without violence, and exploit opponent's weakness. So here lies the crux. On one spectrum of the warfare is Clausewitz and on the other spectrum is Sun Tzu. We also understand that the violence, when we talk about here, implies contact kinetic or physical combat or physical contact between the two adversaries. Contact or military kinetic is an extremely uneconomical in terms of human losses and economy. That means it is regressive. Nuclear and weapons of mass destruction make the regression total and absolute. Means even the victor will not be able to cherish the fruits of victory. Industrial evolution and resultant technological developments have led to subduing the opponents in an economical way, what we call as the low-cost option. Duel on extreme scale causes extreme disorder, and disorder is the law of the nature. But a peaceful world, or a seemingly peaceful world, would like to live in an orderly state. Now, when we look at the two spectrums of the war, when there is a contact kinetic, there is extreme violence. That means there's a lot of uncertainty. And when we look at the hinterland under the same conditions, it is again in turmoil. There is a certain amount of war hysteria. But when it comes down to the normal situation, there is a peace all over on the countryside, that means in the landscape of both the opponents or the world as such. However, the violence represents the black part of the color spectrum, while the peace represents the white. In between black and white comes the color gray. Gray means ambiguity. It does not define the color the way it should be defined. So what they realized was that gray, let's exploit the gray. Now, gray zone, gentlemen, is an area or situation in which it is difficult to judge what is right and what is wrong. It describes the space in between peace and war, in which the non-state actors and the state actors, they compete with each other. Gray zone activities by a state that are harmful to another state and are sometimes considered to be an act of war, but are not legally an act of war. The gray zone between war and peace has grown considerably. Now, key elements of operations within the gray zone marks that keep the salience of conflict or salience of military friction or coercion below the threshold of kinetics. Having seen this, how do we exploit the gray zone or bring these the state in a state or environment gray? So there came the focus got shifted. That means there was a paradigm shift as far as the focus on the future trends of warfare was concerned, to make it a low cost option and not a very uneconomically in terms of human and resources. So the focus shifted from military to the basic constituent of globe, that is society. The populace is the center of gravity of any society, and they are vulnerable, and a democracy which is pluralistic in its makeup and comprises of the multi-ethnic or multi-ethnicities is a very fertile landscape for, or lends itself to, the propagation of hybrid warfare. Why do we call it as a hybrid? Is because it is multi-domainal. It is not one-dimensional. Since it affects the society, so if it affects all the domains of the society. Now, the exploitation of this gray zone to bring it into the hybrid is in accordance with the Sun Tzu's principle. These factors have led to the evolution of warfare or a strategy called hybrid warfare. Hybrid warfare is a blend of conventional and non-conventional instruments. There is no universally defined definition of hybrid war. As has been brought up by Captain Tyagi in the beginning, it entails an interplay or fusion of conventional as well as unconventional instruments of power, and tools of subversion. So that means how does all it involve? The hybrid warfare involves threats to nations, political, military, economic, social, instructional, informational, and infrastructural vulnerabilities. Basically, it exploits the vulnerabilities of the society. It involves non-state actors indulging in subversion roles and are supported by states in order to give them some plausible deniability. Now let's see what are the non-state actors who actually play a role in the propagation of the hybrid war. There are 4 types of non-state actors: non-government organizations, private sector entities, philanthropic foundations, academic institutes, or the violent paramilitary groups like ISIS, etc. Non-state actors have got a dual role to play. While they also enable public monitoring of the review of government policies or their actions, but at the same time, they also have a tendency to demand policies of the government as per their requirements. As far as the Indian part is concerned, we have got NGOs, banks, corporations, media organizations, business magnates, people's liberation movements, lobby groups, religious groups, aid agencies. They are facilitated by globalization. NSAs challenge nation state boundaries and the sovereignty claim. Now let's see how the tools of hybrid warfare operate. Hybrid warfare uses a wider set of what I have already described as the military, political, economic, informational, infrastructural tools with a view to indulge in adversely impinging on their capabilities. That means they interfere with all these domains and try to reduce their capabilities for the good of the society. Targets vulnerabilities across societies in ways that we do not traditionally think about. That means they start challenging the legitimacy of the state. Legitimacy of the state involves its very much being there. It is ideational foundations. That means the way it thinks, the way it makes policies, or the way it deals with the public. Hybrid warfare is intentionally made less visible. It is less visible and it has a long gestation period. There are no immediate results in the methodology of propagation of the hybrid warfare by the blending of the various domains. However, once the effects have started emerging, then we realize that there is some sort of you can say a semblance of a hybrid warfare which is already in the environment. There are 3 major issues involved here: information, cognitive, and social domains. They are the cornerstones of the hybrid warfare. And the solution to deal with the hybrid warfare lies how we handle these 3 domains, that is the confidence building between the state and the public, because the hybrid warfare ultimately aims at destroying the trust between the state and its people. Then hybrid warfare is not alone. It's not in a standalone mode. It has got certain subsets. One of the subsets is unrestricted warfare. The unrestricted warfare came on scene after 1999, and it basically aims at exploiting the global interconnectivity through the cyberspace and the internet. The first rule of hybrid unrestricted warfare is that there are no rules in this. That means it is intrusive. It says that the battlefield extends, there are infinite battlefield, and the battlefield extends to any volume, like we always say in operational art, or when we want to talk about the higher direction of war, that it is the volume which expands. Battlefield is a volume which expands in the minds of the commanders. So here, as far as the hybrid warfare, unrestricted warfare is concerned, it visualizes that all possible domains in the human lives, or of the humanity, or of a society, are very much a part of the warfare. That means the warfare can be extended to these. Then is the asymmetric warfare. Asymmetric warfare is between the two opponents, between the two opposing nations, which do not have the military symmetry, or you can say the resources symmetry to take a kinetic. Then is the low intensity conflict and limited war. Now, in nutshell, I would like to say that the war will be conducted in non-war spheres. The war will be conducted in non-war spheres, so that people's dream of winning military victory through non-military spheres and winning wars with non-war means can become a reality. What it implies, gentlemen, before I sum up, I'll bring it to the Indian context. In the there is another issue which is very important here in the hybrid warfare. It is a blend of the conventional and the unconventional. So the hybrid warfare is as old as the warfare itself. The glaring example is the intrigue of the palaces in the Gone era, and in the 1971 ops, the India did practice hybrid warfare, where it used the military arm as well as the non-kinetic arm of the locals of Bangladesh in the form of Mukti Bahini, and they both synergized with each other, or they work in close contact, and they achieved the success. So hybrid warfare India has already practiced. After the defeat of 1971 ops, the Pakistan thought that how do we take revenge of our defeat in the Bangladesh? There emerged the issue of asymmetric warfare. That means they resorted to terrorism. They resorted to weapons, accumulation of weapons of mass destruction, and the atomic weapons.
We'll come to that. This history.
Okay, sir.
Okay, sorry for butting in.
Fine.
Before I go to Professor, I remember what intelligent people say, that in case of war, truth is first casualty. And if at all we discuss hybrid warfare, probably Hitler was one who exploited this kind of warfare to the hilt. But then I may be wrong. For being in that field, Professor John Nomikos knows much more and much better than I can think of. So request to you, Professor, bring the historical perspective, but before that, add to what Col D K Salwan has already mentioned.
Thank you, sir. It is always a pleasure to see Professor Captain Tiagi and then our distinguished guest here as myself, Mr. DK. I'm very happy to be once again with my Indian brothers. All right. Now, I heard very carefully what DK said, make an excellent definition of what's going on when we use the word hybrid warfare. All right. And I kept some note he said about it touches all the domain of the society. It has to do with a lot of network. And I just would just like to apply what Col D K said when he elaborates so wonderfully about how hybrid war works today in global way. Well, let me use a case studies in the area that I live because everybody now talks about Ukraine and Russian conflict. And the one connection that uh, I would like to point out, Colonel, Captain, is the connection between hybrid warfare and intelligence. A case studies now, Ukraine versus Russia. You have an individual, a leader, Mr. Vladimir Putin, who is a former KGB, and now he's the president of the Russian Federation. In the Cold War, we didn't have to worry about hybrid warfare. The game was clear, all right? Soviet Union versus, the United States. But after the post-Cold War, we have, like Col D K said, conventional versus unconventional. State actor versus non-state actor. So what we see here, our life becomes part of anarchy. Well, let me explain to you how we can organize the anarchy in the post-Cold War era when a new term like hybrid warfare comes in. Well, Mr. Putin had a lot of, let's say, dispute border because it is a Russian community in Ukraine. And of course, it was almost impossible for you, to have directly, to some extent, at the beginning of the conflict, intervention by the Russian, soldiers. So, what the hybrid warfare provides to many leaders all over the world, it's not just a case for Mr. Putin. It provides a lot of alternatives. Number one, paramilitary organization. Number two, proxy organization. Missionary and everybody else can come from different parts of the world to work there. Ukrainian leader, Mrs. Zelensky, asked now to create an international legion. In other words, he wanted to get people from all over the places to go to fight in Ukraine. But who is paying for that? Number three, a part of the hybrid warfare is what Turkey does for so many years towards Syria, missionary, all right, towards Libya. Look what's Libya. They said, so many, paramilitary and civilian organization, other, the Turkish authority, the Sadat, which Sadat is similar to Wagner. Wagner is a missionary group, supported by the ad hoc, not loudly. We don't say that, but indirectly, by supported by Russia. Sadat is an organization, from Turkey supporting Libya. So what we see now, we see many conflict, and this is going to continue. Today is Russian versus Ukraine. Tomorrow might be the Turkey versus, the northern part of Cyprus, which is illegally occupied by Turkey some force in 1974. And like DK and the Captain said, well, the Pakistanis are doing the same with the support, of the government and the intelligence service, the Pakistan intelligence service, ISI, when they do, hybrid warfare, and they create a lot of, turmoil and terrorist act in Kashmir. So what we see today internationally in the post-Cold War is a violation of the basics, law, like the international law, and this part of the hybrid warfare, Captain and DK, has undermined the role of the United Nations, because it's very hard, the UN, to have a 5 permanent member. Russia is one of them. To have, right now, a proxy war against Ukraine, which really violate all the principles they state in the UN, and this is going to have a side effect, side effect as a spillover to the Balkans, because whatever it happens today in Ukraine, as the Slovenian, official said 2 days ago, the next stop of this hybrid warfare bus stop is the Balkan, is Bosnia Herzegovina, is Serbia, is Albania, is Kosovo. Are we going to see a change or shaping of European borders? What I do believe this is sooner or later is going to happen. And I do believe that Mr. Erdogan in Turkey is going to exploit the undercover collaboration with Vladimir Putin, even though Turkey is a member of NATO, but it doesn't matter anything. I mean, if you are a member of NATO and you collaborate with countries, which not member of NATO like Russia or Ukraine, you just use, you know, um, the game you play. You use the game they play in order, to promote your national interest against the West. So the point is the West realize what's going on now? Does the USA administration, have a role to play that? Is NATO acting, you know, to understand the hybrid warfare that Mr. Putin is doing now? Because, like I said, here we have a former KGB officer. And if you don't understand the psychology of the leader, all right, everyone now try to describe the hybrid warfare strategy, coming from Mr. Putin, but they don't understand the chess player of Mr. Putin, and they try, to see that hybrid warfare some way is not really connected, with the professionalization of the intelligence. This man, if you try to understand how he plays hybrid warfare, you need to understand the state of mind. You need to understand Putin's state of mind. If you don't understand the man who plays the game and the hybrid warfare against, against today Ukraine, tomorrow, in the Balkans, a day after that in Cyprus, why not Chinese against Taiwan? Maybe it's a different case. But does you know anyone how the president of Chinese is thinking right now? Possibly no. And what about the Pakistani and Kashmir? I do know that the Indian have excellent armed forces and they have a very good and professional intelligence services, raw people. But the point is the psychosynthesis, the psychology of the leader like Vladimir Putin, who knows how to play the chess and how to combine and connect, hybrid warfare parameters like Kennedy K said, and then the intelligence. I do believe now, and I have to express to you that unfortunately, in the Western intelligence service today, Captain, there is a sloppy statecraft and human intelligence. All right? Because having signal intelligence and satellite is extremely good, but is supplementary to the human intelligence. If the India's agents do not go on the field, the satellite cannot solve the problem. So what we see here, a former KGB officer comes to 2022, he has a background, he has the experiences, and he applies his background from the Cold War to the post-Cold War order. Here I see, Captain and the Colonel, a gap between the Cold War and post-Cold War period. You know what I mean? You know that Russia right now are one head, are one step ahead, not because Mr. Putin is smarter than us, but Mr. Putin knows how to play the game, and the people that he has appointed are members of the Cold War who understand the history of Europe, who understand the problems and the history of the United States. But let me ask you something. How many Westerners today, they understand the Russian history? How many Westerners today, the old people retire, but in Russia Federation, the old people retired from KGB, but they changed, they put a new suit, and now they are on very, sensitive assignment. The old people from Cold War, they are coming, breaking their own experiences in now today's. That's a big problem between West and East, and how they interpreted the hybrid warfare as a case studies.
Col Salwan, you heard Professor. He has given a few examples, and we cannot resist discussing Ukraine. And probably Ukraine and Russia, they are involved in the typical hybrid warfare. So you started with Bangladesh, which happened in 71. Today it is happening in front of whole world. And probably this is the best time to discuss about hybrid warfare. There are a few questions which have come up. I will bring those questions a little later. But now I invite your comment, Col D K Salwan, to what Professor has mentioned, and if you wish to add certain more points here. Over to you.
The professor mentioned a very important aspect of statecraft. There's no denying the fact that in the hybrid warfare, the statecraft plays a very important role. Putin, on his own part, did play the statecraft in a very shrewdly. He studied the US and the NATO very closely, and he realized that US and NATO countries, though they are allies, but there are conflicts of economic interests. I say conflicts of economic interests within the NATO. The European countries like Germany and other countries, they had commerce and trade ties with Russia. They were depending on their gas. Nord Stream 2 was almost to be operationalized, but in the November 2021, they were told, please do not give certification. And prior to his invasion of the Ukraine, the German chancellor visited Russia and had a discussion with Mr. Putin. When he went back, his own naval chief, he praised Mr. Putin, stating that Mr. Putin needs respect for his security concerns for Russia. So he says that if he does anything to Ukraine, he will be well within his rights to protect his national interests. And lo and behold, as a consequence of this statement, he had to resign. The second issue I wish to bring here, what Professor has said is very right, that Russia had invaded Crimea in 2014 and achieved its objectives by virtue of conducting desirable special forces, armed actors, economic clout, information technology, and exploitation of the socio-political polarization in the Ukraine. So Mr. Putin is a good practitioner of statecraft as well as of the hybrid warfare. Even the fall of Crimea came much faster because of the hybrid warfare. I fully concur with your view, Dr. John.
Yes. Yes. Can I speak?
Before I go to Professor, we have seen in these 7-8 days, in fact, the whole buildup was reported 3 months back. So it took 3 months, and now we are probably 8th day of war. Two things came out very clearly. One is that before you go to war, you need to have social media control. Because without social media control, you are not heard, and if you are not heard, you are not understood. Other thing which is more important than social media control is financial health and interaction and communication, so far as financial matters are concerned. And the most important ingredient which has come through this Ukraine and Russia conflict is SWIFT, Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication.
Yes.
And if you lose SWIFT, you cease to have effective financial transaction. So these two ingredients of war have very prominently come out, and if at all we need to learn few lessons, these are the lessons, that two new elements which have been not given so much importance in previous conflicts are becoming very, very important. So over to Professor, and when you make your comment and at the end of it indicate, because there are two questions which you need to respond to. Now, let's hear your comment, Professor.
Sir, as Col D K said quite well, we have to realize one thing. Okay, the social media, of course, played a different role, but the truth is always in the middle related to that. But a very significant part of the war of the hybrid warfare in the post-Cold War era is history. We need to understand history, and we never make the mistake to forget history, because complex matter might be simply explained if we really understand what's going on in the historical fact. Let me explain to you what we say. Now, in Europe and the United States, even in India, many generals are discussing what NATO is doing, to these case studies, Russia versus Ukraine. But let me refresh your memory. When Germany, the former Chancellor Mr. Helmut Kohl, before 1991, asked Francois Mitterrand and Mrs. Thatcher, who were a guarantor for Germany to be united, in other words, he asked the permission to have Germany united. And Mr. Kohl said to these two European leaders, the French and the British, that if we are going to be united in Germany, we are not going to have NATO, expanded, to the east. In other words, close to the Russian border. The last one, guarantor for the guarantor country for the United Germany, was Mr. Gorbachev, Mikhail Gorbachev. And when Mr. Kohl went to Moscow, Gorbachev said to Kohl, before 1991, before the breakup of the Soviet Union, I guarantee to you, Kohl said to Gorbachev, I guarantee to you that NATO is not going to have any major role, and we are not going to move even 1 inch, close to your border. So Gorbachev, when he heard Helmut Kohl to say that NATO is not going to play any significant role to the Eastern Europe and especially to the Russian borders, Gorbachev said okay, and Mr. Kohl was so happy that he did not go to sleep. He woke all night in Moscow. Okay, look what happened. We have the breakup of the Soviet Union. The Soviet former leader Gorbachev said to Germans and to the Europeans, I will allow Germany to be united as long as NATO is not going to move. But look what happened after the breakup of the Soviet Union. Did NATO or the other Western leader keep the promise that they gave it to the last Soviet leader, Mr. Gorbachev? The answer is no. So what we see now, we see that NATO did not keep its promise, and it moved directly close to the Russian border, even though Russia said this is red line for me. So are we really listening or reading the history, or we just forget what we want to forget in order to move on? Dr. Madhu asked us, are we going to have a World War III? Well, the answer is I don't know. But if we really manipulate history and we forget history, maybe history is going to punish us with a more conflict that might escalate to have a global conflict. All right? History will decide it if we are going to have a global war. All right? But we need to keep our promises. If we say to the Soviet today, Russian, NATO is not going to move on, we have to keep our promises. Because the Warsaw Pact, the same organization, when we have the Cold War, was, collapsed. It was broken. So the point is what the West wants to accomplish in Central and Eastern Europe. I think Mr. Putin, realized that the Western country did not keep the promise, and right now Ukraine should have been a bridge between West and Ukraine. The only way for Ukraine to survive is just to be a bridge. A neutral country, independent, like the role of Austria or Switzerland, between West and the Russian Federation. Russia today is not Soviet Union, but is a country that it provides, natural resources and oil to Germany. Germany can say anything they want to say. Without the oil of the Russians, they will be frozen. They make the mistake, to stop temporarily, at least I want to believe, the East Med. This is a big mistake, Captain. A big mistake to have, the East Med in the Eastern Mediterranean, just temporarily frozen. Who's going to provide oil natural resources as an alternative to Europe if they stop the East Med? I think, I'm sorry to say that, but I'm going to say the West is committing suicide on the natural and security energy.
Professor, uh, I know that things would be discussed, hot debates will take place, and who is right, who is wrong will be decided by who is left. So, war decides not who is right, but who is left. And war is such a thing that people need to understand that going to war is easy, but coming out of it is very difficult. Col D K Salwan has got a question or maybe a point, but before that, there are two questions which have come up from World 360 with Manu. Dr. Manu Chaudhary. She is from Ireland and a freelance journalist. I have also been many times in her program. Her question is to you, Doctor. And question is a basic question which anyone in army would love to know and remember. Difference between war and conflict. And she's asking, is it conflict or a clear-cut war? If it is considered a war, other European countries will participate in this war, or will it go for a very long time? I think, in fact, this is the kind of question which builds up the whole discussion of 40 minutes. With the professor responding, it will take even longer. But then remember to make your response short. Professor, to you.
Well, sir, I mean, your comments are quite right, and I do really agree with you. But the point today, as we see it, it seems to me that we have a weak group of the European leaders related, to the Vladimir Putin. The point is, the leader that we used to have in the Cold War, like Konrad Adenauer, like De Gaulle, like Mrs. Thatcher, they were personalities, or François Mitterrand. They were, personalities who knew about history. They understand about Cold War. They knew about suffering. Even in India, which is a great country, like all the leaders. Now we have, leaders in the West that they don't understand the gravity, and sometimes, they need to read more history, even though we haven't lived in a World War II. And what we see today is like. Not a a Western collective action toward, dispute, border dispute in Europe today. And never forget, never forget, the Yugoslavia crisis. The Yugoslavia crisis today, I mean, in 1991, it's a case study that we have a border dispute because of historical reason. So is the Yugoslavia crisis 1991 at the same time that we have the breakup of the Soviet Union related to the conflict in Ukraine and Russia today? Why we forget history? As long as we forget history, Captain, and decay is coming to us. Is coming to us. That's why many people now, many analysts, they say, well, are we going to have a World War III? Well, nobody knows that. We're not prophet, we are human beings. But history knows if we are going to have a World War III. Nobody can decide it. Not Greeks, not the United States, not Canada, not the European Union, not Israel, no one. But look what's happened. As part of this hybrid warfare policy that is run by a KGB officer who knows about human intelligence, signal intelligence, and the new term hybrid warfare. You know what he did? He went to China and he signed up 30 years oil energy collaboration, upgraded its relationship with Iran, and it has Turkey as a proxy state. It manipulated a member of NATO, to work on behalf of Russia, and the West attempts to bring Turkey back to West. Disaster. This is a disaster. People really, to me, is a confusion. I mean, India has a straight policy. You understand? This is my enemy. This is my friend. In the West, we are just trying to fight to figure out who is who. Who is who? Turkey right now is a member of NATO, collaborate with Turkey, collect fundraising and missionary, support Pakistan for its own reason in order to increase the fundraising of the Turkish, industry, and they try through the hybrid warfare to have a Turkish voice through Pakistan, in Kashmir. So if you really try to see who is playing the poker here, you don't see the players. You see the poker, but you don't see the players. It's full of confusion. It's like we see a West, to some extent, West is right now is on decay, like the Athenian Empire, like the Roman Empire, like the Ottoman Empire. What is the West? What is the West? Does NATO forget history? Do Western leaders do not know history? What's going on? Everybody said, what's going on?
Yeah. Thank you, Professor. There is a question for Col Salwan. Before that, I noticed that you wanted to make some point Please go ahead with your point and later on respond to the question which has come from Word 360 with Manu, Dr. Manu Chaudhary from Ireland. So your point and take the questions also little later when you finish your point.
Thank you very much. I would like to support Dr. John on two counts. One is the history. He is very right, and we have already discussed on the same media that the unification of Germany, when it took place, there was a certain amount of assurance given to Mr. Gorbachev that the US and the West will not come knocking at the eastern doorstep of the Russia. And that what precisely has not happened, and that is one of the major reasons for Mr. Putin to go ahead with his invasion of Ukraine, because with the dissolution of or balkanization of the Eastern Europe, he lost the security buffer. And what Dr. John said very rightly, and he said in a very categorical way, that Ukraine must act as a bridge between the West and the Russia. What we normally in the military parlance say, that the Ukraine should be a security buffer between the US and the NATO and Russia. That is one point. Second point he made was that the vacillating attitude of certain countries, Turkey in particular, being a NATO ally, he's also, siding with Russia and with Pakistan and doing all kinds of things. So what it brings us to one very particular point, that is that on the global arena, where the diplomacy and the relational transactions take place, there are no permanent friends, there are no permanent enemies. It is the permanent interests. So that is why a new term came up sometimes back called as frenemy. Frenemy means you are a friendly enemy. We are friends apparently we are friends on the face of it, but fundamentally we dislike each other and we are rivals in some or the other form. These are the only 2 points I wanted to make in support of Dr. John.
Question which Dr. Manu had asked, and she wanted to know from you whether India will be able to face this type of hybrid warfare. She has asked Colonel Salwan that is India ready for any type of hybrid warfare?
Okay, now let me dwell on this issue for 2-3 minutes. India is a cultural civilization. I will read out something which occurred to me. India is a civilizational state of very unique nature. India has a certain self-perception. India has a personality of its own. India has interests of its own. India has a character of its own. India cannot be defined negatively as being against somebody. But at the same time, I wish to assure Doctor that when we look around at the things, how we diffused the protracted standoffs of CAA and the anti-farmer protests, how eruditely our state actors, they acted and they kept the state intact, because it is the, whatever it may, the hybrid warfare will continue to take place. But at the same time, we have to build the trust between the state and the public, because after all, hybrid warfare attacks or focuses on the vulnerability of the multi-ethnic Indian pluralistic society. So long as the state keeps this in mind and maintains the trust or the social contract between its constituent public and the government, India will thrive. India will weather all kinds of hybrid warfares. Hybrid warfares will not end. They will keep happening in some or the other form, because they are intrusive. They have almost intruded into each and every sphere of our social public domain. So I wish to assure from my own experience and whatever I have learned and I have seen in the few years, India is one state which will withstand the hybrid warfare in a very, very robust manner, and it will be wherever it is.
Thank you,
Captain,
Col Salwan.
Captain,
Mature person in me wanted to discuss hybrid warfare, but child in me is very anxiously asking the question, will there be world war? Yes or no?
Uh, you see, it like
Yes
what
or
Dr.
no? Yes or no?
No.
Okay. Same question to you.
yes, no, no,
Professor,
but
will there
Captain,
be world war? Yes or no?
no.
No. We are all three very optimistic about goodness of humankind. Yes, please, go ahead.
Yes, I just want to say, just to persuade my our audience, our distinguished audience, about one case studies. Greece gave 10,000 Kalashnikov to Ukraine. I mean, but let me tell you how we received the Kalashnikov. A boat was arrested, a Ukrainian boat was arrested in the Greek Sea, transferring more than 10,000 Kalashnikov to the radicals in Libya. In Libya. All right. We just got we stopped the boat and we got all the ammunition. So these guns from Ukraine did not go to Libya. And the hypothetically speaking, this Ukrainian boat left a Turkish port. And now Greece had this Kalashnikov and they sent it back to Ukraine. I mean, you understand what I'm saying? A Ukrainian transferring Kalashnikov illegally to radicals, jihadists in Libya. We stopped the boat. We got the Kalashnikov and we sent it back to Ukraine. This is the kind of ammunition that we give it to them. It's a joke.
Yes, Doctor, there is a lot of Ukraine and Russia left to be discussed, and we'll keep it for next discussion. And for next discussion, I also just mention a point here. Maybe it will develop into a full-fledged discussion. I read that another axis with Israel, UAE, and Greece is emerging, in which India is also one part. Would it be something other than Quad and other than NATO, other than so many axis and coalition and groups? We will discuss this.
Yes. The
When
point
you
is,
agree, we'll discuss this point further. But then I believe that goodness of human nature will certainly prevail, and maybe 2 days or 3 days, ultimately both the parties will be compelled to come to negotiation. Things are fought in war, but peace is brought while in discussion. So,
well, yes.
please be short.
I just want to share a thought with you here that one of the greatest lessons of military history has been that it is not always profitable to fight somebody else's war. Now, if the US and NATO decide to fight for Ukraine, it may not so happen. So it reduces the probability of a conflagration at a global level.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. The point.
I
Yes.
request attention of our viewers.
Yes. Very briefly.
In the background, you see Captain Scott.
Very briefly, I
And-
fully agree with you, Captain, and Colonel DK, but I want to say that every crisis has opportunities. Now, India is a major player to see how they can be more involved in the international world community, and to see that India could come in the Eastern Mediterranean, in Aegean. That's what I always say for the last 15 years, that a collaboration between Greece, Israel, India, Egypt, and Cyprus is a must, is necessary for India to be in Europe, because there is a big right now, a big, how can I say, a big gap in the international relation. China right now is not really welcome to many European countries, but the door is open for India to have a strategic and commercial and political and economic collaboration with many European countries plus Europe. So India right now is on the right moment to make a shift, to make a move, come close to Europe, and especially the Eastern Mediterranean, when we have a huge, natural resources. The India companies and the Indian petroleum company should be here. They are welcome by Europeans compared to the Chinese, or to the problem that we are facing from very countries. So Gulf state like United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, even Saudi Arabia, even Egypt, Cyprus, why not Jordan, Israel, Greece, and the major countries like France or UK are welcome India. The point is, who is going to understand that, to activate India to come close to Europe and to be a major player. I mean, China is not like the
Doctor,
China we used to know.
Doctor, we'll discuss this matter further.
Just
And
1 minute I
I
want
know
to
that
say.
it is good subject and full length discussion needs to take place. Col
Yeah.
Salwan,
One
we have
last.
completed our time. Please be short.
Okay. What Dr. John has said is very right. That is what Lord Curzon, the Governor General of India during the colonial era, said 200 years ago. India must venture out in the maritime domain to show its strategic power, its resilience, its overall aura in the world opinion. I fully agree with you, Dr. John. You have repeated what Lord Curzon said 200 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Col Salwan and Professor John. Thank you very much for sparing your time and effort. And thank you to all the viewers. You might have noticed that in the backdrop, you see Captain's Cut written. In this Captain's Cut forum, we bring certain personalities who made their profession out of their passion. And those professionals who were so passionate about something that they left their profession and made profession as they were passionate about certain things. We regularly bring outstanding personalities from different walks of life and do the interview, bring their success stories and stories full of passion, devotion, dedication, and perseverance. Watch this channel, Captain's Cut, and we will bring another episode of Captain's Cut very soon. Till then, be happy, remain safe, remain secure. Corona is still lurking behind. Whether Russia or Ukraine fight and continue whatever they do, but they have still not fought and vanquished successfully this Corona menace. Corona is going to stay, and let's fight Corona, not the people. Thank you very much. This is close of discussion.
Thank you. Thank you.